I dug into my drawer, found the little pills, took one, went to bed, and the strangest thing that happened is I had this very, very deep sleep, very quick, and 10 minutes later I woke up and I had a normal day, and the whole episode was over. And I was like, whoa, like, this is not supposed to happen. Like, I know it's just a sugar pill. This was not impressive. I'd had no expectations. This is not supposed to happen. And as a physicist, I was like, it's really not supposed to happen. Water has a maximum density at 4 degrees Celsius, which is really weird. I mean, normal, like standard materials, the density goes up as you go down in temperature. All your standard materials around you will have that property, aluminium, glass, whatever. To have this maximum density at 4 degrees Celsius is actually quite fun because it makes that ice floats, because then ice has a lower density. That's why life was able to evolve on Earth through the Ice Age, because the life was protected in the water below that remained fluid.
If you had a skeptic in front of you right now who is a scientist, and you had to say something to just opening them up to the possibility of being open-minded about homeopathy, not necessarily agreeing to it, but just being open-minded to homeopathy, what would you say to them?
For me, it comes down to...
Today's episode is being released on the 10th of April when we celebrate the birthday of Samuel Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, who was born on the 10th of April, 1755. And I cannot think of a better episode to release on this special day than Dr. Alex Tournier, who is the chairman of the Homeopathic Research Institute. Now, I have been trying to get Alex on the podcast pretty much since I started this almost 5 years ago. So for me, this is a complete fangirl moment. And I'm so excited because Alex has updated some of the hypotheses that he has on the theory of how he thinks homeopathy works, which is based on the quantum coherence domains. Now, I only understood probably about 1% of what he said today, and the reason it's not 0.5% is because I spent the entire day watching YouTube videos and listening to everything I could find on the work of this incredible man, who, by the way, is a physicist and also specializes in quantum physics, and he has a PhD in biophysics. So you could tell that he was working really hard today to get this information into human speak so the rest of us could kind of understand, the work that he is doing. Homeopaths as a collective have an incredible debt to the Homeopathic Research Institute because they really are working tirelessly to help keep the skeptics off our back. They have compiled the most incredible resource which any of us can use, and that is HRI-research.org. So if you have any questions about research in homeopathy, if you have a skeptic that's giving you a hard time, don't even engage with them. Just send them straight to the Homeopathic Research Institute's website. They have a great FAQ there. There's some wonderful videos on there. You can get updated on when their next conference is, which, going by the YouTube videos, looks incredibly fun. And on the website, you can also go and subscribe to their newsletter. Please make sure you go and subscribe to their YouTube channel. They're also on Facebook and Instagram as well. Please go and support the amazing work that Alex Tournier, Rachel Roberts, and their whole team are doing to move homeopathy forward. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Happy Homeopathy Awareness Week. Today is day 1, and we are going to be having episodes every day for the next 7 days to celebrate Homeopathy Awareness Week. Thank you so much for listening.
Welcome to the Homeopathy Hangout podcast, where we discuss all things homeopathy from around the world. And now our mum and your host, Eugenie Kruger.
Hello, homies, and welcome back to Homeopathy Hangout, where today I have the most incredible privilege of welcoming Dr. Alex Tournier to the podcast. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Eugenia, for having me on your podcast. Really exciting. It's the first for me, so it's really, really nice.
Well, not as exciting as for me because, like I said, the podcast's been running for almost 5 years, and you've been at the top of my list of guests who I've wanted to have on the show. So it is the hugest honor, and in fact, such a celebration that we're going to release this episode on the 10th of April on Samuel Hahnemann's birthday. So you get the top spot. Now, Alex, we have a tradition here on the podcast. No matter how famous you are, everyone gets asked the same question. How were you first introduced to homeopathy?
Yeah, so that's a question I get asked quite often, and it's quite interesting because as a student, I was quite ill. I mean, I had chronic fatigue after my master's, and the conventional doctors did all the usual tests and said, well, there's nothing really wrong with you, so just, move along. And so I was not well. And so I was sleeping 19 hours a day, and I ended up trying many complementary therapies, Chinese, shiatsu, whatever, different things. And one of them was homeopathy. And homeopathy was, to be honest, probably the least impressive form of therapy. When you compare to needles and stuff, homeopathy, you go and see a lovely lady at her home, and she opens a big book and she talks to you about weird things and asks you completely random questions and ends up giving you a few pills in a nondescript little bag, telling you take when needed. So I was like, well, that's not going to help much. So I actually promptly forgot about the pills, put them in the drawer for the when needed moment, which was a bit difficult to grasp. And then what happened is, as did at the time, I got really down, and at that point, I would usually cancel my diary for days just to recover. And I thought, okay, this is when needed. So I dug into my drawer, found the little pills, took one, went to bed, and the strangest thing that happened is I had this very, very deep sleep, very quick. And 10 minutes later, I woke up and I had a normal day, and the whole episode was over. And I was like, whoa, like, this is not supposed to happen. Like, I know it's just a sugar pill. This was not impressive. I'd had no expectations. This is not supposed to happen. And as a physicist, I was like, it's really not supposed to happen. So that for me just sparked interest in the whole thing. And I was like, wait a minute, there's something that we clearly don't understand about this. And then it's a fantastic research project. So it led me eventually to dedicate myself to research into homeopathy. So yeah, that's how I got into homeopathy. Yeah.
Now, you're not just a physicist, which is impressive in itself, but you specialize in quantum physics, and then you have a PhD in biophysics, and then you did your master's in water, right? Something to do with water.
So I did my undergrad in physics at Imperial College, my master's in theoretical physics in Cambridge, and then my PhD in Heidelberg on the structure of water around proteins. And a lot of my research has had to do with water and trying to understand homeopathy and the dilutions. And currently, so I'm now attached to University of Bern, where I continue these kind of fundamental research into homeopathy.
And you studied at the best homeopathy school in the world, Center for Homeopathic Education.
And I did.
And
so
you're a homeopath.
The full story is really interesting because after recovering somewhat from chronic fatigue, I ended up in Germany doing my PhD. Initially, I wanted to do a PhD in quantum physics, but I had been too ill, so I went to biophysics, and it was very interesting, all these aspects of water. So I did all that. And at the end of the PhD, I was like, well, what should I do now? And then I was like, well, homeopathy is still like top of my interests. So how about I find a postdoc in London, and then I can study homeopathy on the side. So this is what I did. I got a postdoc at Cancer Research UK. Fantastic place, fantastic research, great colleagues. 10 years I did there doing projects at the boundary between mathematics, physics, biology, computing. So I was the in-house kind of consultant for complex problems in physics, maths. So it was fantastic for me. I had a great time. And then at the weekends, and I would go and study at the Center for Homeopathic Education with Marcus Fernandez. And it was a great, completely different world. But yes, so I learned homeopathy there. The reason I did that is really that I wanted to make sure that I understood the practice of homeopathy. It was very clear to me that from taking the homeopathy, that it was not, something conventional, that there was something happening that I was not going to capture from reading physics books. So I wanted to make sure that I understood the practice, that I understood the patients that what happened when, the real world of homeopathy, not necessarily imposing a pharmacological perspective on it, even if unconsciously. So I decided to study homeopathy for that. Yeah. And it's Marcus, actually, who came to me at one of the coffee breaks and said, "Hey, Alex, we really need some more research in homeopathy. Is there anything you can do?" And that's I was already kind of thinking out, well, what do I do next? So that sparked the start of the Homeopathic Research Institute. So I got, it was great at the time. We had Peter Fisher. So Peter was like really supportive. I had Claire Elton, and Liz Thompson. So I had some heavyweights behind me to help me create the institute. And then Rachel Roberts joined a bit later. But it's really that impulse came from the courses at CHE. Yeah.
And I didn't realize this, but obviously the title of institute is actually a protected title. In one of the videos that I watched, you were saying how it's because you had all these incredible people behind you that you were able to get this title. Just for any of our listeners, Alex is obviously the chairman of the Homeopathic Research Institute. I'm always sending people to that website because it is an incredible resource. Anybody who's a skeptic, just send them straight to that website, especially the FAQ section of the website. It answers a lot of the questions that skeptics are constantly throwing at us. It is all answered there, so you don't need to break your head trying to explain it. Just go to their website. It is the most unbelievable resource. And also, some of you might recognize Alex from the documentary Just One Drop, by the way, which if you haven't watched it, everybody on the planet should watch that documentary. It's so good. The part that I am most excited about having you on is, the $1 million question: how does homeopathy work? And there are so many different theories out there, and I believe that you've just put forward a paper to a journal on some of the most up-to-date things.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about that.
So yes, I'm working on this paper. It's in the process. I'm sending it to different journals. So it's a theory I've been working on for a while. Actually, I have a draft of that theory from 2019. So it's kind of old, but I realized that nobody was catching on and nobody was understanding it. So I rewrote it. And now I think it's much, much better, much more understandable. So I'm going to try and explain it and see what happens. So for me, to start thinking about how homeopathy works, which is my fundamental kind of scientific question that I find fascinating, is for me, I could see that there's different things you need, like something that's going to store some information, because in some form, we have 2,000 to 3,000 remedies in the Materia Medica, plus all the dilutions. And we know all that's differentiating. So you need to have some media, something that's going to have quite a lot of specificity in terms of how subtle the information can be and stored for a reasonable amount of time. Because we know these remedies last at least several years. Some people say much longer, possibly, I don't know. So it's not something that's going to be so already you've discarded many standard processes for that. You need something quite strange. We also know that the whole dilution and succussion process, which is so central to homeopathy, seems to be not only like some kind of like nice thing, it's necessary and to the construct of making a homeopathic remedy. We know that the work of Professor Betty, that if you don't succuss, then you'd lose the effect. So succussion and all that is necessary. And also at the end of the day, you could have something that has information, but it needs to act on your biological system. So how does it do that? You have to invoke a new way of interacting with biology, because it's not going to be a purely lock and key standard pharmacological process. It's going to be something different. And I think so. What I'm proposing is two things, really. One is that it's some kind of oscillatory pattern that is in the pills. And I'm proposing that this oscillatory pattern is stored through unknown phenomena in water and water physics. Now, when I say oscillatory pattern, I think a lot of homeopaths will resonate with that idea, in the sense that it's quite an easy analogy to follow. You go, okay, I'm going to give, and it's going to resonate. So we have a lot of language in the homeopathy framework that's about matching the energy or getting a resonance or giving an impulse to the system. All that kind of works well with the idea of a frequency. And so the idea that you might have some kind of system of frequencies that would interact with your system. So that's the framework. But then how do we make it work in practice? And so I've been looking at water because all our dilutions are made in water. I am unaware of anybody who's really tried to make dilutions not in water and succeeded. So water seems to be quite essential. And also, we are mostly water. I love the saying that we are water that learned how to walk. So we are mostly water. And that has a relevance as well. And so in terms of water, which is kind of my thing, the water is everywhere, right? We know we have it everywhere. Actually, I'm going to try some right now. And it's so ubiquitous that we kind of forget that it's actually pretty amazing. Actually, I was looking at the latest reviews of water physics from 23, and still they're like, we don't understand the stuff. There are anomalies and some nice ones because, for example, water has the density, a maximum density at 4 degrees Celsius, which is really weird. I mean, normal, like standard materials, the density goes up as you go down in temperature. All your standard materials around you will have that property, aluminium, glass, whatever. To have this maximum density at 4 degrees Celsius is actually quite fun because it makes that ice floats, because then ice has a lower density, which is quite fun when you're having a cocktail in the summer. And also that's why ice floats. That's why life was able to to evolve on Earth through the Ice Age, because the life was protected in the water below that remained fluid. Things like that. Water has an incredibly high boiling point for the constituents, so hydrogen and oxygen. It should have a much lower boiling point. And that, again, is hard to explain. Usually the theory invoke hydrogen bonds, so that's the conventional understanding, is that there's something called a hydrogen bond in water that explains all its fantastic properties, density and high boiling point, and that it's actually a really, really good solvent, which is really essential for the evolution of life. And also explains that it has so many phases. So, ice and water and vapor, but water has another kind of 20 of them, different phases, super cooled water, different glass phases, so amorphous ice and things like that. And they seem to find another one, every so often. It's incredibly complicated, actually, when you start looking at it. So you have all this happening, and the conventional understanding is that, we have something called hydrogen bond, which explains all this. Now,
I think Bruce Lipton actually was one of his theories a few years ago now was that the remedies are kind of transmitting the information through the hydrogen bonds. I think that was one of the theories as well. Hey,
the hydrogen bond is kind of a phenomenological observation. We know that if we think about a hydrogen bond, it seems to explain things. So it's kind of a useful prop mentally to understand the complexity of water. Now, what's interesting is there is another way of looking at water, which is from two Italian theoreticians called Preparata and Del Giudici, and they were working on laser physics, and they were using a theory called quantum electrodynamics. Now, that sounds very complicated, but basically, quantum electrodynamics is the theory that explains how light interacts with matter. So it's a quantum theory, and it's a fundamental theory that will be everywhere in your computer, your screens, your sensors, all that's quantum electrodynamics at the bottom. So it's everywhere. So they had the idea of applying it to water to say, well, what about the water interacting with light? Water happens to have a strong dipole, so it has a separated charge distribution, which creates a little dipole, mini dipole, and this can interact with light. And so it's like, hey, what happens if we really look at that? And lo and behold, what they predicted is that water has this emergent property, which is a coherence domain, that water can go into this oscillation mode, and that this oscillation mode has a lower energy, which means it's favored, it's protected energetically. And so water has naturally, the conclusion is that the water naturally has this oscillatory behavior, which is of an electromagnetic nature. So it's kind of oscillating. It's very fast, but it's doing that. If you use that, then you can recover things like the hydrogen bond and many of the anomalous properties straight from the underlying physics without having to go through the H bond. So the H bond then becomes something that's predicted rather than a purely explanatory tool. And then what's interesting is, okay, so now you have a new property of water that's based on these oscillations. And what I've been trying to construct is then a framework in which these oscillations become a way to first record information and then to play it back to interact with biology. So to record the information that needs the pattern of oscillation of the water could, in principle, record the patterns emanating from the starting substance. Any substance that you will put in water will have natural frequencies associated with its presence in the water just because of the random oscillations in it. So we will have, and so we know from biology, all proteins have natural oscillations and natural frequencies associated with their function. And so you were just saying, well, water just resonates with that and then picks it up and enters into a resonance mode that then gets carried across through the dilution process. There's certain properties of that I'm not going to go into, but it kind of works through the dilution process. And then at the end, you have a set of frequencies of oscillations, a complex oscillatory pattern that then you get back to your biological system, your patient. And there what happens is that I suspect that our biology has evolved to be sensitive to these signals. It makes kind of a lot of evolutionary sense. If water is doing this kind of recording of oscillatory patterns, then why wouldn't biology use it? So if I have the advantage that I can see from a distance that over there is food and over there is poison, then it makes sense that I would evolve to make use of that information and go towards food. And so I think the biology has evolved ways to use that information, that is the memory of the substances around in low dilutions, for biological purposes. And so, for example, it then makes a lot of sense why we're still sensitive to remedies such as sulfur or natmure, which are incredibly common substances. Why do they feature so strongly in the materia medica when they are completely common substances, which they're everywhere? But in terms of our original biology, they would have mattered a lot. And it stands to reason that then cells would have kept a lot of sensitivity to these substances through these oscillatory patterns. And so in this way, you have a system where you can explain how the water structures capture these complex oscillatory patterns, that they get amplified through the succussion and dilution process. The original substance gets diluted out, but the oscillatory information gets carried across and then eventually given to the patient and triggers that reaction in a patient. And as we know, it's just about getting an impulse. In principle, such a complex oscillatory information could very subtly shift complex pathways. So it doesn't need to work on just one molecule, one protein. It could work on a whole pathway of molecules, modulating them up and down very subtly, such that it overall gives a significant effect. And you can see it also makes their biological sense that our complex pathways would have adapted to incorporate such subtle information and modulate themselves according to what's coming out from the outside. So there's kind of evolutionary arguments for why we would be sensitive. And there's also just purely that we know that proteins are sensitive to frequencies. You can modulate the activity in the lab in this way. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the framework. And so I'm presenting the whole framework, and then the aim is eventually to like the maths and then more predictions. So eventually we can study it in the lab. That's kind of the whole thing. Sorry.
Well, firstly, I just want to say thank you very much for explaining it in such clear terms. And it must be really hard for someone who is clearly ridiculously smart like yourself to try and get these huge complex ideas into like human language. I can just imagine you talking with your buddies at Burton University. You guys must have so much fun when you can use all these like terminology and everyone actually understands what you're saying. But the only reason I understood about 1% of what you just said is because I have spent I have spent the entire day chatting, listening to your previous interviews you've done and videos you've done, and then Google ChatGPT quantum coherence domains to try and figure out what is it that you're talking about. And, just trying to understand a little bit. And some of what I kind of got was like in this succussion process, there's something that happens where the molecules kind of like, I don't know, they disperse and then they kind of like clump together again or something along those lines. Yeah. And then when you were talking about all of this actually happening before human life even existed, like, this sort of stuff sounds absolutely amazing. And I also listened to one of your little videos on the HRI website with Stephen Cartwright, where he was saying that they actually have got these dyes where if you gave him 2 vials of water and one is just plain water and one is succussed water, he actually has a way that he can definitively tell you which one is the succussed water because they are using these. I think that's what you were talking about with the light that kind of in some way interacts with the, bioelectricity or something. I don't know.
I can hear you.
I don't know if any of that makes sense. Like I said, about 1% I understood, and that was after a day of researching.
I'll try harder.
We have no. We have lots of listeners around the world who are very smart and are probably understanding everything that you're saying. So for their benefit, please do continue.
You touched upon 2 points. One was an aspect that I didn't talk about, which is the prediction is that the water would form these domains. So they would be about 100 nanometer across. So that's kind of the length scale that we expect for this phenomenon. And also the prediction of the theory is that if they resonate at the same frequency, these things would tend to clump together. And this is where you understand the role of succussion, because in succussion, the energy provided by the succussion, the kinetic energy, can break these clumps apart and then enable them to spread around the sample, so then replicate such that in the next dilution, the information is propagated.
So the kinetic energy from the action of the succussion then kind of like makes them unclump, and then that can then travel through to the next succussion.
Yeah, and then so they can spread around the sample. Otherwise, they'll just stay close to the original substance, and then nothing would happen. The whole thing would just get diluted out. If you add kinetic energy, these informed resonating water clumps kind of get spread out. They can then multiply themselves, and then eventually the original substances get diluted out. But the resonating clumps, so to speak, or clusters, carry on through the dilutions. So that's one of the mechanisms that is really interesting, yes. And you mentioned Stephen's work with the dyes, and Stephen has a genius idea with the dyes. So these dyes are little molecules that are sensitive to electromagnetic field around them. So they're small molecules, so they're really sensing at a atomic level, I want to say molecular level, what's happening around them. And you can tell with spectroscopy that their spectra changes a bit according to the field around them. And so Stephen has been able to show that there's a change, that the dyes detect a change with homeopathic potencies, which is, for me, another indication that there's something electromagnetic happening here. There's a electric field or something that is happening there. So Stephen's work's been really good at bringing that from the experimental side, some really interesting insights here.
You've just made me realize, because I use a little photospectrometer for a thing called a Lego scan. I don't know if you've heard of that. It scans the palm of the hand, and it uses photospectrometry to figure out what your vitamin, mineral, and vitamin status is. And the guy who developed this technology won a Nobel Prize in 1930 for his work on spectrometry. So it must be.
Is it the infrared?
It must be, yeah, because it uses a little red light. So yeah, probably. It scans the palmar dermis, and then it goes about 4 millimeter under the dermis, and then
that sounds like I didn't know about this device. There's lots of cool things.
It actually comes from France, so I'll send you some podcast episodes we've done on it. Yeah, but it was all, the guy won a Nobel Prize in 1930 for his discovery of photospectrometry. So I'm just now clicking when you've said that. I'm like, oh, that must be what Cartwright is using as well, if he's using this, the changes in the, maybe not.
Yes,
Either way.
his insight was really like to use these particular type of molecules that are so sensitive.
He's detecting the color changes, right? Because I think in that video he was saying that at the moment he can detect about a 7 or 8% change, but the goal is to kind of like be able to detect like a 15% change in the color, and then he can tell with certainty. But it's
so he's getting better and looking at different molecules that have different sensitivities and more sensitivities in different setups to look at different hypotheses.
I don't understand if people like scientists who are skeptical about homeopathy, don't they think it's cool that you can see the difference between normal water and succussed water? Like, surely that must interest them enough to want to research more about homeopathy, or at least give you like heaps of grant money so you can investigate it further. Because that's exciting, isn't it? I think it's
heaps of
exciting.
grant money sounds cool. But the problem is we have the succussion we just talked about adds a problem in terms of research, is that we know that as soon as you can do succussion, you're going to get tons of gases into your sample. So, and that's going to make nanobubbles and the
nanoparticles from the glass and
nanoparticles from the walls. And so got all this mixture happening that we know it's happening. And therefore, to be able to tell what is the succussion and what is actually the homeopathic remedy, like the specific action of that remedy versus that remedy. And so there's complexity there that makes it difficult to do. The research is not easy in that sense that you can just do a simple experiment. And we're having to untangle what is the nanoparticle, what is the gases, what is the specific of the remedy that you diluted. And so we have regular, I think last week we had another meeting with Stephen and another group about how to do that. It's definitely not an easy topic, and it's evolving. Like from standard research, you say, well, you want to use this type of control, and it has to be a succussed control because. And then you go, well, wait a minute, okay, if you use a succussed control, what are you actually doing? There's a lot of subtlety, and I understand why, it's not easy to reach an unequivocal result. My hope is that as we progress with experiments, say from Stephen's work, we progress from the theory, then we can meet, the better the theory, the more we can make testable predictions that the experimentalists can then test, like specifically, and then be able to tease out the different effects. One of the conclusions from the theory, the quantum coherence theory, is that we expect the effects to be larger on more complex biological systems. And that seems to be the case. That is, homeopathy, we have good results in clinical studies on animals and in plants, cells. And the smaller we get, the smaller the effect size. For humans, you can get to like 15% effect size, something like that. And then as you go down, get to 1%, you need more and more tighter statistics to detect small and smaller effects. And so it seems homeopathy is a small effect that more complex biological organisms are able to use maximally. And so that, again, I mention that because it seems biology has evolved to detect these things. And so we're often left with, biological systems are good at doing it, but it doesn't tell us how they're doing it. So there's that catch there, and trying to understand on a deeper level, well, how do the biological molecules happen to sense it? And then that's a trap with the skeptics, because again, it's that's then placebo, and then, that's a biological system, so it's kind of dirty and you don't control everything. And so it adds to the complexity that we have that aspect, yeah.
Yeah, I like that, with the nanoparticle thing, you were saying that in one of the interviews that homeopathy is more than that, because you're going to get nanoparticles anyway from like the sides of the glass or whatever as you're succussing it. So that alone doesn't explain the effect of homeopathy, which I like. But then, to add another layer of complexity, I think it was you that said that, the consciousness of the person doing the experiment can also affect things. So, I mean, that is
Well,
mind-blowing in itself. And I think you also mentioned about the field effect, which is something that, kind of
yeah,
blows my mind too, because I've just recently had a homeopath on, Deborah Olenev, who only treats her clients who have autism by using room doses or pillow doses or pocket doses. So she only makes them carry a remedy. And you mentioned about Montagnier's experiment where he had the remedy, I think, next to like a bottle with blank pillules. And so,
yeah.
so you've got the consciousness that can affect it. You've got the feel that can affect it. There's so many things that can affect it. And then I'm going to add another layer of that because I had a question about, do you think there's maybe some method to the madness of homeopaths who store their Berlin Wall or their plutonium nitricum remedies away from their other remedies because of the field effects?
So consciousness effects are very interesting. I'm not haven't really dived into those. I know they creep up all the time. They creep up in physics in surprising places in quantum physics. So it's not to be discarded. I've been looking at more kind of quantum phenomena like locally. And in particular, you mentioned the field effect. And the field effect is just, a few, like 10 centimeters distance. So Montagnier published on that. And there's Endler in Austria who did some research on that. And there seems to be an ability for the remedies to act at least through glass at a certain distance. And that's compatible with my theory that the action is electromagnetic in nature, so that it's a vibrational electromagnetic information that's being passed. And it doesn't matter that there's glass there, it just goes across. So in that sense, if you carry the remedy or if you put it close to you, it will start to act on your system. And that's another aspect, of course, that's difficult when you do experiments, because if you think of your experiment and you've got your verum and you've got your placebo, conventionally you assume that your placebo is completely safe, that your control is completely inert and not going to change. But it appears that we need to be more careful in homeopathy, because what if you leave them together for 19 hours or 18 hours in the Montagnier experiment, and lo and behold, your control is not a control anymore. It has started to pick up some of the properties of the verum. So that adds a lot to the complexity of protocols. And it's very hard to explain all this to skeptics because it's like, oh my God, how do you do this? So yeah, and it's interesting because the theory then goes towards the experience of the homeopath that I've been using, things like carrying and olfaction and like just the proximity of the remedy or in the pocket. I've always heard anecdotes and of people who say that. And so, yeah, why not? I mean, it's compatible with the theory that I'm promoting. There's this weird thing. I mean, like, as conscious beings, can we interact back? I don't know. There's an interesting aspect there that I don't know. I mean, I was talking about how we probably have evolved to sense our environment with these subtle cues, but do we ourselves emit things? Open question. But these are interesting things to look at.
It's interesting with consciousness. I don't know where it was something, somebody said consciousness and astrology, it's such a conundrum because you can't observe it outside of it. You can only observe it while you're inside of it. Like you can't observe consciousness when you're out of, you can't be out of conscious when you're observing. And the same with astrology. We're all affected by it. So it's hard to study it because you can only study it within itself. But this is where I also love Beta Austin's work because, she did that experiment with the eggs, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where she put a free range organic egg with some, just farmed eggs around it. And that wholesome egg was able to affect the other eggs, when she then put the patterns in there. I don't know if you've seen that experiment, but it's...
No, I haven't seen that experiment.
Oh, you would love it. It's amazing. It's in her book as well, which is great. Can you just tell us a little bit about the HRI, how people can support your work? Because what you're doing is so vital and it benefits all of us. And I think you've been in Switzerland since 2021 now. Like when I heard that you've got like a resident position at the university there, and this is like your life's work that you do. I mean, that's like mind blowing. Can you just tell us a little bit firstly about that? Because that's seriously cool.
Yes, so I joined the group of Stefan Baumgartner at the IKIM, so the Institute for Research to Complementary Medicines, which is under Professor Ursula Wolf, and that she's responsible for kind of integrative medicine research. So yeah, that's what most of my work is research, integrative medicine, And under that, I'm homeopathy, mode of action. And so that's the setup. And before, I was already interested in water research for homeopathy, and I was doing that in Heidelberg. So I had opened a lab in Heidelberg called the Water Research Lab, specifically to tackle these issues. But it was out of the university setting, and it was too difficult. But now with the university, it's much better. So so that's my setup.
Good old Switzerland. I love that they're so open-minded. Thanks, Swiss. We appreciate it.
Oh, yes. So in Switzerland, we are able to do it because there was a referendum in favor of homeopathy. And so there is a public mandate for research into complementary medicines, and we're protected there, which is very unique in Europe because we're seeing that research across Europe in homeopathy is very, very difficult. If you mention the homeopathy word in publications, your chances of getting published go down quite drastically. And so that's a shame. There is a very clear polarization of the debate, and we haven't been able to really bridge the dialogue between the two. There's a very strong a priori against homeopathy. It's oh, it's all placebo, it's all pseudoscience, hocus pocus. And then there's the other extreme, people's like, oh, of course, homeopathy, of course. And kind of go, wait a minute, let's try and figure out a common language where we can say, look, there are real phenomena here. There are real benefits for patients. We don't understand how all this comes about, but the facts are there and we need to do the research. So trying to find that language is still very much work in progress. And is very much what the HRI is about finding that not neutral, but objective center saying, look, here are the facts. We know that there's clinical benefits that's there. There are experiments in plants, in cells. They're happening and they're very hard to dismiss. How do you want to say the experience on piglets?
There's no placebo, surely.
Exactly. So how are you going to say it's a placebo? So there are things that are very puzzling to any scientific mind that's open enough to that. And so it's really about saying, okay, what do we know and what's solid? And then where do we go from there? So HRI has really been about putting the ball back in the center, saying, like, this is not all black and it's not all white. We know there's some things, that some are more blurry. So the HRI website is a lot of information, and a lot of it is just about making sure that we're talking sense, that when a study is good, we say it's good, and when a study is bad, we say it's bad, and so that we can all talk and we can all move forward with the same language. And another aspect of the HRI has been the conferences, because I realized, for me, coming from the conventional research, I was like, well, research really is also a social game. You put researchers together and, get them to talk to each other. They're all a bit, nerds. So you need to kind of get them and kind of herd them together a bit, and then they'll make little projects together. And then that's how science works. And I was seeing that we were missing that in homeopathy, and hence the idea of the conferences. And also with Rachel, the idea that the conferences should be something more of like a public debate, an open forum that people from outside could come and examine, so to speak, the quality of the research, that we have nothing to hide in terms of the quality of our research. There are professors and PhD students and from all over the world that meet at the conference, and that the quality is, we put everything on YouTube. You can see all our conferences on YouTube, available for anybody who wants to listen to any of the researchers. And the skeptics have never criticized any of that. But I think it's about also kind of being proud of our homeopathy, what we've achieved in research. There is good stuff. We have good researchers, and with the conferences to animate that community and to promote, it's been really good. And I want to say a boost to the team. Rachel Roberts, our CEO, has been amazing, dealing with a lot of things, and the team is growing steadily. We have a beautiful team that mixes communication with scientific knowledge and homeopathy knowledge. So combining all that, need to find the right people for that. So the team has been really, really good and growing. So we're really proud of that. Yeah.
Just for our listeners, we've had Rachel Roberts on the podcast, so do make sure you go listen to that episode as well. I also watched on your YouTube channel today as many of the videos on there as I could, which is amazing. But what struck me firstly is the conferences look incredible. They look so fun, and very clever idea to have wine there as well. I'm sure that would get the nerds talking too, because I saw
It's
them
part of the
standing there with their drink, get them talking. But when you look at how many people you've had presenting at these conferences, they're all this, professor that, because actually, spoiler alert, I've started putting together a list of names that I would love if you can ask them if they can be on the podcast. And there's probably like 30 names of people that you've had at conferences, and all of their titles are doctor or professor. So it's not like some random person off the street. These are highly educated people that are spending their life, working on homeopathy. Like, there can't be that many crazy people who are super smart. I don't know.
well,
Maybe there is, but
that's
these
it.
are highly educated people who are, obsessed with homeopathy and fascinated by it and asking all these questions, which actually leads me to my final question, because I know that you're pressed for time, and that is, if you had a skeptic in front of you right now who is a scientist, and you had to say something to just opening them up to the possibility of being open-minded about homeopathy, not necessarily agreeing to it, but just being open-minded to homeopathy, what would you say to them?
I think for me, it comes down to experiments, like the ground truth, and we can, theorize. And at the end of the day, what we can all agree on is experiments, and there are fundamental trials that are been well done. I'm thinking again of that piglet study, which we use often because it just stops the whole placebo argument, and you can have to think. And then there's also experiments on cells, and you have to go, okay, maybe I don't know, maybe it's not biochemistry, maybe there's something else. That's the type of way I tend to go with skeptics. It's just like also to remember that in terms of the history of science is full of our hubris in thinking that we know everything, when actually next corner we are faced with the fact that we don't, that science is evolving all the time. And I think homeopathy is part of that movement, that there is something there that at least drives me. Like this is something that we don't understand, and it's quite fascinating. So for me, it's just always going back, look, these are experimental facts. Either show me that the experiment was badly done, or then you have to accept that there's something that we don't understand. And we can just start from there. Like, look, there's something that we don't understand. And that's the beginning of good science.
For our listeners, don't engage in Facebook arguments with trolls. Just send them to hri-research.org. They have an incredible newsletter. Make sure you sign up to that. Subscribe to their YouTube channel. Go to their Facebook. Go to their Instagram. And their next conference is in 2027. Thank you. And if you can contribute, if you can donate to their cause, this is probably one of the best things you can ever spend your money on, because all of us around the world benefit from the research that HRI is doing. Alex, this has been a dream come true having you on the podcast. Thank you with all my heart.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, India. Really nice.